On a cold December night in 1776, exhausted soldiers crossed the icy Delaware River behind a commander. Many expected the American rebellion to collapse, yet George Washington pressed forward. The gamble would lead to victory at Trenton, revive morale, and transform a struggling resistance into a credible fight for independence. His decision that night revealed courage, patience, leadership, and resolve. That dramatic crossing came during an age of empires, colonies, trade, and revolution. The 18th century was shaped by competition among European powers, especially Britain, France, and Spain. In North America, British colonies expanded, populations grew, and tensions gradually increased between colonial interests and imperial authority. Debates over rights, representation, taxation, governance, liberty, identity, and power increasingly shaped public life. Washington emerged from this changing world and became one of the most influential figures in modern history. He commanded the Continental Army, helped secure American independence, and later served as the first President of the United States. His actions established precedents for government, civilian leadership, and constitutional rule. Generations studied his example as a model of public service and duty. Yet Washington was not born into certain greatness. He did not inherit a throne, command vast armies in youth, or receive an elite European education. Instead, he advanced through persistence, self-discipline, ambition, experience, and careful observation. Over time, he learned to manage land, lead men, navigate politics, and confront difficult challenges with remarkable steadiness, judgment, patience, maturity, and determination throughout. His rise also reflected the opportunities and dangers of colonial America. The frontier offered land, wealth, and advancement, but conflicts with rival empires, native nations, disease, and harsh conditions remained constant. Washington gained valuable experience during military campaigns, where successes and mistakes alike taught lessons about leadership, logistics, strategy, discipline, responsibility, resilience, caution, confidence, adaptation, and survival under intense pressure. When resistance to British policies intensified, many colonists searched for capable leadership. Washington possessed military experience, political connections, personal discipline, and a reputation for integrity. These qualities helped him gain trust across different colonies. Once appointed commander of the Continental Army, he faced shortages, defeats, uncertainty, divided loyalties, limited resources, inexperienced troops, and enormous expectations from supporters and critics alike. Victory was never guaranteed. Washington endured military setbacks, harsh winters, political disputes, and constant pressure. Some questioned his judgment, while others doubted the revolutionary cause itself. Nevertheless, he continued adapting, learning, and encouraging perseverance. His ability to keep the army together during difficult periods became one of his greatest accomplishments and lasting strengths for future generations to study and admire. Beyond military success, Washington faced another historic test. After independence, the new nation needed stability, legitimacy, and effective institutions. Many revolutions throughout history produced chaos or dictatorship, yet Washington supported constitutional government. His willingness to surrender military authority and later leave the presidency voluntarily strengthened public confidence in Republican principles, peaceful transitions, lawful governance, civic virtue, and national unity deeply. Because of these achievements, Washington occupies a unique place in American memory. Admirers celebrated him as the father of his country. Critics have examined contradictions within his life, including his relationship to slavery. Such debates continue today, reminding historians that important figures can inspire admiration while also raising difficult questions about morality, power, responsibility, equality, justice, freedom, and human complexity. To understand how George Washington became a revolutionary commander, founding president, and enduring symbol, we must begin long before battlefields and political triumphs. His story starts in colonial Virginia, where family, environment, opportunity, hardship, education, ambition, and character combined to shape the future leader. Before fame, power, and victory, there was a young boy whose path was only beginning then. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, a British colony on the eastern coast of North America. At the time of his birth, no one could have imagined that this infant would one day command a revolutionary army, help create a new nation, and become the first president of the United States. His arrival occurred during an era when the British Empire was expanding rapidly, and the American colonies were becoming increasingly important to Britain's wealth and influence. Washington was born into the Washington family, a respected but not exceptionally wealthy family of Virginia planters. His father, Augustine Washington, owned several farms and plantations and was involved in agriculture, land speculation, and local business activities. Augustine belonged to Virginia's growing planter class, a group of landowners who held considerable influence in colonial society. Although the family enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle, they were not among the wealthiest elite families in Virginia. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, came from a respected Virginia family and was known for her strength, determination, and strict character. She played a significant role in shaping George's personality, especially after the death of his father. Mary valued discipline, hard work, and self-control, qualities that would later become central to George Washington's leadership style. Throughout his life, many observers noted his remarkable ability to remain calm under pressure, a trait often linked to the lessons he learned during childhood. The Washington family traced its ancestry back to England. George's great-grandfather, John Washington, had emigrated from England to Virginia in the 17th century. Like many ambitious settlers, he sought opportunities in the New World. Over generations, the family acquired land, established social connections, and improved its standing within colonial society. By the time George was born, the Washingtons had become respected members of Virginia's planter class, though they still worked to increase their wealth and influence. Colonial Virginia's economy depended heavily on agriculture, particularly tobacco production. Tobacco served as the colony's primary cash crop and was exported in large quantities to Britain and other markets. Plantation owners relied on extensive labor systems, including enslaved Africans, to cultivate and harvest crops. This economic structure generated wealth for some families while creating profound inequalities that would become one of the most controversial aspects of colonial society and later of Washington's own life. The social structure of Virginia was highly hierarchical. Wealthy landowners occupied the highest positions, followed by smaller farmers, craftsmen, laborers, and indentured servants. Enslaved Africans occupied the lowest level of this social order and endured harsh conditions without freedom or legal rights. Young George grew up observing this system, which shaped the environment in which he lived and later influenced many of the difficult decisions he would face as an adult. Politically, Virginia remained firmly under British control. Colonial governors represented the British Crown, while local assemblies managed many internal affairs. Most colonists considered themselves loyal British subjects. The idea of independence from Britain seemed unlikely during Washington's early years. However, growing populations, expanding settlements, and increasing economic activity gradually created conditions that would later contribute to political tensions between Britain and its American colonies. The cultural environment of colonial Virginia emphasized family reputation, land ownership, religion, and social responsibility. Members of the planter class were expected to manage property effectively, participate in local government, and maintain respectable public behavior. Young George Washington absorbed these expectations from an early age. His family's position provided opportunities for advancement while also creating responsibilities that demanded maturity and discipline. Although George Washington entered the world as the son of a provincial planter, the circumstances of his birth placed him within a society full of opportunity, ambition, and contradiction. The family, culture, economy, and political system that surrounded him would shape his character and future ambitions. Before he became a soldier, statesman, and national leader, he was simply a young boy growing up in colonial Virginia, learning lessons that would influence the course of history. George Washington spent his childhood in the colony of Virginia, surrounded by farms, rivers, forests, and the routines of plantation life. The world he knew was very different from the bustling cities and modern nations that would emerge centuries later. Colonial Virginia was largely rural, and families depended heavily on agriculture for their livelihood. As a young boy, Washington grew up learning practical skills, observing adults at work, and developing habits that would later contribute to his success as a military and political leader. During his early years, George lived with his parents and siblings on various family properties owned by his father, Augustine Washington. Because Augustine managed several farms and business interests, the family occasionally moved between different estates. These experiences exposed George to a variety of environments and responsibilities. He learned about farming, livestock, land management, and the challenges involved in maintaining agricultural operations. Such knowledge would later prove valuable when he became a plantation owner himself. Unlike many future national leaders, Washington did not receive an extensive formal education. His schooling was relatively limited compared to the education available to wealthy European elites. He attended local schools where he studied reading, writing, mathematics, and practical subjects useful for managing land and conducting business. Although he never attended a college or university, Washington possessed a strong desire to learn. Throughout his life, he continued educating himself through observation, reading, and experience. One of the most significant events of his childhood occurred when he was only 11 years old. In 1743, his father died unexpectedly. Augustine's death dramatically changed the course of George's life. Without his father's guidance and financial support, opportunities that might have been available to him disappeared. For example, some members of Virginia's upper class sent their sons to England for advanced education, but such possibilities became unlikely for George after his father's death. Following this loss, Mary Ball Washington assumed primary responsibility for raising her children. She managed family affairs with determination and expected her children to demonstrate discipline and responsibility. George developed a close relationship with his mother, although their personalities occasionally differed. Mary's strong character influenced her son deeply. The lessons she taught about perseverance, duty, and self-control remained visible throughout his adult life and leadership career. Washington's childhood personality attracted attention from family members and neighbors. He was often described as serious, reserved, and dependable. Unlike some children who sought constant attention, George preferred observing situations carefully before acting. He displayed patience, maturity, and a strong sense of personal responsibility. These characteristics distinguished him from many of his peers and contributed to the respect he earned as he grew older. An especially important influence came from his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. Lawrence had received a better education and possessed valuable social connections within Virginia society. George admired him greatly and looked to him as a role model. Lawrence introduced George to influential people, encouraged his ambitions, and helped broaden his understanding of the wider world. Their relationship became one of the most important influences during Washington's formative years. Childhood experiences also revealed Washington's growing interest in leadership and achievement. He enjoyed outdoor activities, horseback riding, hunting, and exploring the Virginia countryside. These pursuits developed physical endurance, confidence, and practical skills. Friends and family members noticed his determination and willingness to take responsibility. Even as a young boy, he showed signs of the discipline and courage that would later define his military career. Another important aspect of Washington's childhood was his fascination with personal improvement. He copied lists of rules concerning manners, behavior, and conduct into notebooks. These exercises reflected his desire to develop self-discipline and earn respect from others. By practicing courtesy, honesty, and self-control, he sought to build a reputation for integrity and reliability. Although no one could predict his future achievements, George Washington's childhood revealed many qualities that later shaped his destiny. The challenges he faced, the lessons taught by his family, and the habits he developed during these early years prepared him for greater responsibilities. The serious, hard-working boy growing up in colonial Virginia was gradually becoming the ambitious young man who would soon enter a new stage of life filled with opportunity, education, and growing aspirations. George Washington's teenage years marked a crucial period in his development. During this time, he began transforming from a quiet boy into a young man with ambition, practical skills, and a growing understanding of the world around him. While many future leaders of his era received extensive formal education in prestigious schools or universities, Washington followed a different path. His education came through a combination of classroom learning, personal study, mentorship, observation, and real-world experience. These years helped shape the character and abilities that would later make him one of the most influential figures in American history. After the death of his father when George was 11 years old, opportunities for advanced education became limited. Wealthier families sometimes sent their sons to England to receive formal schooling, but the Washington family's financial circumstances made such plans difficult. As a result, George continued his education within Virginia. His studies focused primarily on practical subjects such as mathematics, geometry, surveying, bookkeeping, and writing. These disciplines proved far more useful to his future career than classical subjects like Latin or Greek, which were commonly taught to elite students. Washington quickly demonstrated a talent for mathematics and measurement. He enjoyed solving practical problems and developing skills that could be applied directly to land management and business. His ability to calculate distances, measure property boundaries, and organize information would later contribute to his success as a surveyor and military commander. Even at a young age, he showed a preference for useful knowledge rather than purely academic study. One of the most important influences during his teenage years remained his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. Lawrence had served in the British military and possessed valuable social connections among Virginia's leading families. George admired him deeply and sought to follow his example. Through Lawrence, George gained access to influential individuals who exposed him to broader opportunities and higher social circles. Lawrence's guidance helped nurture George's ambitions and introduced him to the responsibilities expected of Virginia gentlemen. A particularly significant figure introduced through Lawrence was Thomas Fairfax, a member of the influential Fairfax family. Fairfax owned vast amounts of land in Virginia and recognized potential in the young Washington. Under Fairfax's encouragement, George became interested in surveying, a profession that offered both financial opportunities and valuable experience. Surveying required intelligence, endurance, precision, and the ability to navigate difficult terrain. Washington embraced these challenges enthusiastically. At the age of 16, Washington began working as a surveyor. This experience took him far beyond the familiar environment of his family home. He traveled through forests, mountains, rivers, and frontier settlements, often spending weeks in rugged conditions. These journeys exposed him to the realities of colonial life and taught him self-reliance. He learned how to endure physical hardship, make independent decisions, and interact with people from different backgrounds. Such experiences developed confidence and leadership skills that would prove invaluable later in life. During these years, Washington also formed important friendships and professional relationships. His reputation for honesty, reliability, and competence helped him earn the trust of employers and colleagues. Unlike some young men who relied solely on family connections, Washington worked hard to establish his own reputation. He understood that success required discipline, effort, and personal responsibility. Despite his achievements, Washington faced challenges. He lacked the elite education enjoyed by some of his contemporaries and occasionally felt self-conscious about this limitation. Rather than allowing this disadvantage to discourage him, he compensated through determination and continuous self-improvement. He read extensively, observed successful individuals, and practiced skills that would enhance his effectiveness in public life. Washington's teenage years also strengthened qualities that would define his future leadership. He became known for self-discipline, careful judgment, persistence, and emotional control. Whether surveying remote wilderness areas or managing professional responsibilities, he demonstrated maturity beyond his years. These characteristics earned respect from older and more experienced individuals. By the end of his teenage years, George Washington had acquired valuable practical knowledge, influential mentors, and growing confidence in his abilities. The young surveyor who explored Virginia's frontier was preparing for even greater challenges ahead. Soon he would enter adulthood, where new opportunities, responsibilities, successes, and failures would further shape the man destined to play a central role in the birth of a nation. As George Washington entered adulthood, he found himself standing at the edge of new opportunities and responsibilities. The skills he had developed during his teenage years as a surveyor had earned him respect, experience, and financial independence. Unlike many young men who depended entirely on family wealth, Washington was already building a reputation through his own efforts. These early adult years would become a period of ambition, learning, setbacks, and important decisions that shaped the future course of his life. By his late teens and early 20s, Washington had established himself as a successful surveyor in Virginia. The profession provided a steady income and allowed him to explore vast areas of frontier land. Surveying was demanding work that required physical endurance, accuracy, and strong judgment. Washington often traveled through remote wilderness regions, facing harsh weather, difficult terrain, and uncertain conditions. These experiences strengthened his confidence and taught him how to make decisions under pressure. His surveying work also increased his understanding of land ownership and economic opportunity. In colonial America, land represented wealth, influence, and social status. Washington recognized this reality and began acquiring property whenever possible. His interest in land speculation reflected his ambition to improve his position in society. Rather than remaining satisfied with modest success, he sought greater opportunities and worked diligently to achieve them. A major turning point occurred when Lawrence Washington, George's beloved half-brother and mentor, became seriously ill. Lawrence suffered from tuberculosis, a disease that claimed many lives during the 18th century. George spent considerable time assisting and supporting him during his illness. When Lawrence died in 1752, Washington experienced a profound personal loss. Beyond the emotional impact, Lawrence's death removed one of the most important influences in George's life. Despite this setback, Washington inherited valuable opportunities through his connection to Lawrence. Most importantly, he eventually gained control of Mount Vernon, the estate that would become his lifelong home and symbol of his success. Ownership of Mount Vernon elevated his social standing and increased his responsibilities as a landowner. Managing the estate required careful planning, financial oversight, and leadership skills. At the same time, Washington developed a growing interest in military service. The British colonies in North America faced increasing tensions with France, which controlled vast territories to the north and west. Competition for land and influence created conflicts that threatened colonial security. Washington saw military service as both a duty and an opportunity to advance his career. He admired military achievement and hoped to earn distinction through service. In 1753, Washington received his first significant military assignment from Virginia's governor. He was tasked with delivering a message to French forces occupying disputed territory in the Ohio Valley. Although still a young man, he accepted the challenge eagerly. The journey required traveling hundreds of miles through dangerous wilderness during winter. Washington successfully completed the mission, demonstrating courage, determination, and reliability. However, early military experiences also brought failure and hardship. During the opening stages of the conflict later known as the French and Indian War, Washington commanded colonial troops in several difficult situations. Some of his decisions were criticized, and he suffered military setbacks that damaged his confidence. One notable defeat occurred at Fort Necessity in 1754, where his forces were compelled to surrender after being surrounded by French troops and their allies. Rather than allowing failure to define him, Washington treated these experiences as opportunities for growth. He carefully analyzed his mistakes and sought to improve his leadership abilities. The challenges he faced taught valuable lessons about strategy, logistics, discipline, and command. These lessons would later prove essential during the American Revolution. During early adulthood, Washington's ambitions continued to expand. He pursued military advancement, managed growing landholdings, and strengthened relationships with influential figures throughout Virginia. Each success increased his confidence, while each setback deepened his understanding of leadership. By the end of this period, George Washington had evolved from a young surveyor into a respected landowner and emerging military officer. Though he had not yet achieved fame, the foundations of his future success were firmly in place. The experiences of early adulthood prepared him for the moment when he would first attract widespread public attention and begin his rise toward historical greatness. George Washington's rise to public attention did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of hard work, military service, personal ambition, and the ability to learn from both success and failure. By the mid-1750s, he had already established himself as a capable surveyor, landowner, and military officer in Virginia. However, it was his role in the French and Indian War that first brought his name to the attention of people throughout the American colonies and even in Britain. The conflict provided Washington with opportunities to demonstrate leadership, courage, and determination on a much larger stage. The French and Indian War began as part of a larger global struggle between Britain and France for control of territory and influence. In North America, both nations claimed vast areas of land, particularly in the Ohio Valley. Competition for these regions created tensions that eventually erupted into military conflict. Virginia's colonial government viewed the French presence as a direct threat, and Washington became one of the officers tasked with defending British interests. His first major breakthrough came through the missions he carried out in disputed frontier territories. Even before large-scale fighting began, Washington's journey to deliver a diplomatic message to French commanders attracted attention. The expedition required courage, endurance, and resourcefulness. Reports of his experiences were published and widely circulated, giving many colonists their first introduction to the young Virginian officer. Although he was still in his early 20s, people began recognizing his potential. Despite the publicity, Washington's early military career was not free from setbacks. The surrender at Fort Necessity in 1754 was an embarrassing defeat and could have ended the ambitions of a less determined man. Critics questioned some of his decisions, and the experience exposed weaknesses in his military knowledge. Yet Washington refused to allow failure to define his future. Instead, he studied military strategy more carefully, sought advice from experienced officers, and worked tirelessly to improve his skills. His determination soon produced results. During later campaigns, Washington demonstrated bravery and leadership under extremely dangerous conditions. One of the most famous examples occurred during General Edward Braddock's expedition against French forces in 1755. The British army suffered a devastating defeat after being ambushed in the wilderness. Amid the chaos, Washington displayed remarkable courage by riding across the battlefield, carrying messages, organizing troops, and helping prevent a complete disaster. Stories of his actions spread rapidly. Witnesses reported that bullets pierced his clothing and killed horses beneath him, yet he escaped unharmed. Many regarded his survival as extraordinary, and some even viewed it as evidence that he was destined for greatness. While such stories may have been exaggerated over time, they significantly enhanced his reputation among colonists who admired courage and resilience. As Washington's fame grew, so did his responsibilities. He was appointed commander of Virginia's colonial forces and tasked with defending the frontier. This position required managing soldiers, supplies, fortifications, and relations with local communities. Although the challenges were immense, Washington gained valuable experience in leadership and administration. He learned how to motivate troops, coordinate operations, and handle political pressures from government officials. Public reactions to Washington became increasingly positive. Newspapers mentioned his accomplishments, political leaders praised his service, and ordinary colonists respected his dedication. His reputation extended beyond Virginia, making him one of the best-known military figures in British North America. Importantly, this recognition was based not only on battlefield actions but also on his professionalism, discipline, and commitment to duty. The opportunities created by this growing fame were significant. Washington expanded his network of influential contacts, strengthened his position within Virginia society, and developed confidence in his ability to lead. Military service provided lessons that would later prove invaluable during the American Revolution. More importantly, it introduced him to the broader political and military world beyond local affairs. By the end of the French and Indian War, George Washington had transformed from a regional landowner into a widely recognized public figure. His achievements, challenges, and growing influence made him one of the most respected men in the colonies. Although even greater responsibilities lay ahead, his rise to public attention had begun, setting the stage for his emergence as a leader whose actions would eventually change the course of history. After gaining recognition through his military service during the French and Indian War, George Washington entered a new phase of his life. He was no longer simply a frontier officer or ambitious landowner. Instead, he had become one of Virginia's most respected public figures. The years that followed allowed him to expand his authority, strengthen important alliances, increase his wealth, and develop the political skills that would later prove essential during the struggle for American independence. This period marked the steady growth of his influence within colonial society. One of the most significant developments in Washington's life occurred after the French and Indian War ended in 1763. Having served for years in difficult military conditions, he resigned from active service and returned to Mount Vernon. Rather than viewing retirement from the military as an end, he saw it as an opportunity to focus on expanding his estate and pursuing broader ambitions. The experience he had gained as a commander increased his confidence and enhanced his reputation throughout Virginia. Mount Vernon became the center of Washington's growing influence. He devoted considerable effort to improving the estate's productivity and profitability. Unlike many landowners who relied exclusively on tobacco, Washington experimented with different crops and agricultural methods. He managed workers, supervised construction projects, expanded farmland, and sought ways to improve efficiency. His success as a plantation owner increased both his wealth and his standing among Virginia's elite families. Another major milestone occurred in 1759 when Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow. The marriage brought companionship, social prestige, and significant financial advantages. Martha possessed extensive property and resources, making the Washington household one of the most prominent in Virginia. Their partnership strengthened George's position within colonial society and expanded his network of influential connections. Marriage also introduced Washington to new social responsibilities. He became a respected host, frequently welcoming visitors to Mount Vernon. Political leaders, military officers, businessmen, and travelers often visited the estate. Through these interactions, Washington built relationships that would later support his political career. His reputation for courtesy, integrity, and professionalism helped him earn the trust of people from many different backgrounds. As his influence grew, Washington entered public service. In 1758, he won election to Virginia's House of Burgesses, the colony's legislative assembly. This position allowed him to participate directly in government and gain valuable political experience. Although he was not known as a gifted public speaker, he earned respect through careful preparation, practical judgment, and a willingness to listen. Colleagues viewed him as reliable and responsible, qualities that enhanced his effectiveness as a leader. During these years, Washington formed important alliances with other influential Virginians. He worked closely with prominent landowners, merchants, and political figures who shared concerns about colonial affairs. These relationships expanded his understanding of government, economics, and public policy. More importantly, they positioned him within a network of leaders who would later play key roles in the movement for independence. The political climate of the colonies was also beginning to change. After the French and Indian War, Britain faced substantial debt and sought additional revenue from its colonies. New taxes and regulations generated growing dissatisfaction among colonists. Washington initially considered himself a loyal British subject, but he gradually became concerned about policies that he believed threatened colonial rights and self-government. His growing reputation gave weight to his opinions. People respected him not only because of his military achievements but also because of his character. He was known for honesty, discipline, and a strong sense of duty. As debates over British policies intensified, Washington emerged as a respected voice within Virginia politics. His influence extended beyond local issues and increasingly touched broader questions affecting all the colonies. By the early 1770s, Washington had become one of the most important figures in Virginia. His authority rested on multiple foundations: military experience, economic success, political service, and personal integrity. He had built alliances, expanded his influence, and established a reputation that few could match. This growth in power and influence prepared Washington for the extraordinary challenges that lay ahead. The conflict between Britain and its colonies was deepening, and events were moving toward confrontation. Soon, Washington would be called upon to play a far greater role than anyone could have imagined, leading him toward the greatest achievements of his remarkable life. The years between 1775 and 1789 marked the peak of George Washington's achievements and secured his place among the most influential leaders in world history. During this period, he guided the American colonies through a Revolutionary War, helped secure independence from one of the most powerful empires on earth, and later became the first president of a new nation. His accomplishments were not the result of a single victory or decision. Instead, they emerged from years of perseverance, leadership, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to the cause he believed was essential for the future of America. Washington's greatest achievement began in June 1775 when the Continental Congress appointed him Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. At the time, the American colonies had little chance of defeating Britain. The British Army was highly trained, well-equipped, and supported by the world's most powerful navy. In contrast, the colonial forces consisted largely of inexperienced volunteers with limited supplies and training. Many observers doubted that the rebellion could survive, let alone succeed. Despite these disadvantages, Washington accepted the enormous responsibility placed upon him. He understood that victory would require patience, discipline, and endurance rather than quick battlefield successes. Throughout the Revolutionary War, he worked tirelessly to transform a collection of local militias into a more effective fighting force. He emphasized training, organization, and military discipline while maintaining the confidence of both soldiers and political leaders. One of his most significant accomplishments was keeping the Continental Army together during periods of extreme hardship. Soldiers often lacked food, clothing, shelter, and pay. Harsh winters, disease, and battlefield defeats threatened morale. The winter encampment at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778 became a symbol of these struggles. Many armies would have collapsed under such conditions, but Washington's leadership inspired his troops to continue fighting despite overwhelming difficulties. Washington also demonstrated remarkable strategic judgment. Rather than risking everything in a single battle, he focused on preserving his army and prolonging the conflict. He recognized that as long as the Continental Army remained in the field, the revolutionary cause remained alive. This strategy frustrated British commanders and gradually increased the likelihood of American success. Several military victories further enhanced Washington's reputation. His daring crossing of the Delaware River and victories at Trenton and Princeton revived colonial morale at a critical moment. These successes demonstrated that British forces could be defeated and encouraged continued support for independence. Although Washington experienced defeats as well, his ability to recover from setbacks became one of his greatest strengths. The ultimate military achievement came in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia. Working closely with French allies, Washington coordinated a campaign that trapped British General Charles Cornwallis and his army. Cornwallis's surrender effectively ended major fighting in the Revolutionary War. The victory at Yorktown represented the culmination of years of effort and established American independence as a reality rather than a distant hope. Yet Washington's achievements extended beyond military success. After the war, he made a decision that astonished many observers around the world. In 1783, he voluntarily resigned his military commission and returned to private life. Throughout history, victorious military leaders often seized political power for themselves. Washington chose a different path. By surrendering authority to civilian government, he strengthened the principles of republican government and demonstrated his commitment to liberty rather than personal ambition. His reputation reached even greater heights when he was unanimously elected the first president of the United States in 1789. As president, Washington helped establish the foundations of the new federal government. He created precedents for executive leadership, supported the Constitution, and worked to unify a nation still recovering from war. Every action he took helped define the presidency for future generations. At the peak of his success, Washington was admired not only as a military hero but also as a symbol of national unity, integrity, and public service. His leadership during war secured independence, while his leadership during peace helped ensure the survival of the new republic. These achievements transformed him into one of history's most respected statesmen and guaranteed his lasting place in the story of the United States. Although George Washington achieved extraordinary success, his path was never easy. Behind every victory stood a series of challenges, setbacks, critics, and powerful enemies who threatened both his career and the cause he represented. His greatness was not defined solely by success but by his ability to endure difficulties that would have broken many other leaders. Throughout his military and political life, Washington faced opposition from foreign powers, rival commanders, skeptical politicians, and personal disappointments. How he responded to these challenges became one of the defining features of his leadership. The most obvious enemy Washington faced was the British Empire. During the American Revolution, Britain possessed enormous advantages in wealth, military strength, and global influence. The British Army was considered one of the finest fighting forces in the world, supported by a powerful navy that controlled major sea routes. In contrast, Washington commanded an army that was often poorly supplied, poorly trained, and constantly struggling for survival. From the beginning of the war, many believed that defeating Britain was nearly impossible. Washington experienced numerous military setbacks that tested both his confidence and reputation. In 1776, British forces captured New York City after a series of successful campaigns. The defeat was a severe blow to the revolutionary cause. Many soldiers deserted, public morale declined, and some political leaders began questioning whether the rebellion could succeed. Washington understood that a single major mistake could destroy everything the revolutionaries had worked to achieve. Financial problems created another enormous challenge. The Continental Congress lacked sufficient money to properly support the army. Soldiers frequently went unpaid for long periods. Essential supplies such as food, clothing, ammunition, and medical equipment were often scarce. Washington spent countless hours writing letters and appeals to government officials, urging them to provide resources necessary for survival. The constant shortages frustrated him and made military operations far more difficult. The winter at Valley Forge represented one of the darkest periods of the Revolutionary War. Thousands of soldiers suffered from hunger, disease, and exposure to harsh weather. Some lacked shoes, blankets, and adequate shelter. Death and illness spread throughout the camp. Critics blamed Washington for the army's condition, while others questioned his leadership abilities. Yet instead of surrendering to despair, he remained with his troops, sharing their hardships and encouraging perseverance. Washington also faced rivals within his own side. Not everyone supported his leadership. Certain military officers and politicians believed they could command the army more effectively. During what became known as the Conway Cabal, several individuals attempted to undermine Washington's position by promoting alternative leaders. Rumors, criticism, and political maneuvering threatened his authority. However, Washington responded with dignity and restraint rather than anger. His reputation for integrity ultimately protected him from these attacks. Foreign enemies were not his only concern. The war involved complex relationships with Native American nations, many of whom allied with Britain for their own strategic reasons. Frontier settlements often faced attacks, creating additional military pressures. Washington had to balance multiple threats while attempting to maintain unity among the colonies. Personal setbacks also challenged him. Throughout the war, Washington endured the burden of responsibility for thousands of lives. Every defeat brought criticism, and every decision carried enormous consequences. He often worried about the future of the revolution and feared that failure would lead to disaster for the colonies. Despite these pressures, he maintained remarkable self-control and determination. Even after independence, Washington encountered political opposition. As president, he faced criticism from emerging political factions that disagreed about the direction of the new government. Some accused him of favoring one side over another, while others questioned specific policies. The political unity he hoped to preserve became increasingly difficult to maintain. What distinguished Washington from many leaders was his response to adversity. He rarely acted impulsively or allowed emotions to dictate decisions. Instead, he relied on patience, discipline, and careful judgment. Whether confronting military defeats, political conspiracies, supply shortages, or public criticism, he focused on long-term goals rather than temporary frustrations. By overcoming these major challenges and enemies, Washington strengthened both his character and his reputation. The difficulties he faced revealed the resilience that made him an effective leader. His ability to persevere through adversity ensured that when the most critical turning point of his life arrived, he would be prepared to make decisions that changed the course of history forever. Every great historical figure experiences a moment that changes the course of their life. For George Washington, the defining turning point came during the American Revolution when he was entrusted with the leadership of the Continental Army and ultimately guided the colonies toward independence. Although many important events shaped his career, no period carried greater significance than the years between 1775 and 1781. The decisions he made during this time determined not only his personal legacy but also the future of an entire nation. In June 1775, representatives from the colonies gathered at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Tensions between Britain and the colonies had escalated into open conflict following battles at Lexington and Concord. The delegates understood that if the colonies hoped to resist British authority, they needed a unified military force. After careful consideration, Congress selected George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Accepting the position was a momentous decision. Washington knew the risks involved. Failure could result in disgrace, imprisonment, or even execution for treason against the British Crown. Yet he believed the cause was important enough to justify those risks. By accepting command, he committed himself fully to a struggle that would dominate the next several years of his life. The challenges before him were enormous. The Continental Army lacked proper organization, training, equipment, and supplies. Soldiers came from different colonies and often had varying priorities and loyalties. Washington's first task was transforming this collection of militias into a coordinated fighting force. The responsibility was immense, and the future of the revolutionary movement depended largely on his ability to succeed. The most critical turning point within the war itself occurred during the dark winter of 1776. Following a series of defeats around New York, the revolutionary cause appeared close to collapse. British forces had driven Washington's army across New Jersey, and morale among soldiers and civilians was dangerously low. Enlistments were expiring, desertions increased, and many believed defeat was inevitable. Faced with this crisis, Washington made one of the boldest decisions of his career. On the night of December 25, 1776, he ordered his troops to cross the ice-filled Delaware River and launch a surprise attack against Hessian forces stationed at Trenton. The operation was extremely risky. Severe weather, dangerous river conditions, and the possibility of failure threatened the entire mission. Despite these obstacles, the attack succeeded brilliantly. Washington's forces captured hundreds of enemy soldiers and achieved a victory that far exceeded its military significance. The triumph at Trenton restored confidence in the revolutionary cause and demonstrated that the Continental Army remained capable of effective action. A second victory at Princeton soon followed, further strengthening morale and public support. The consequences of these decisions were profound. Had Washington chosen caution instead of action, the revolution might have collapsed. Instead, his willingness to take calculated risks revitalized the movement and bought valuable time for the colonies. The victories transformed public perception and convinced many Americans that independence remained possible. The turning point reached its ultimate conclusion in 1781 at Yorktown. After years of struggle, Washington coordinated a campaign with French allies that trapped British General Cornwallis and his army. The surrender at Yorktown effectively ended major combat operations and paved the way for American independence. This achievement represented the culmination of years of leadership, sacrifice, and perseverance. The historical significance of this period cannot be overstated. Washington's decisions helped secure the success of the American Revolution and altered the course of world history. The creation of the United States inspired future movements for self-government and constitutional rule across the globe. His leadership demonstrated that determined citizens could challenge even the most powerful empire of their age. More importantly, Washington showed that true leadership requires courage during moments of uncertainty. The defining turning point of his life was not merely a military victory but a series of decisions made when failure seemed likely and success appeared distant. By choosing perseverance over surrender and action over despair, he helped create a nation and secured his place among history's most influential leaders. His defining moment became America's defining moment as well. While George Washington is best remembered as a military commander, founding father, and first president of the United States, his personal life reveals a more complete picture of the man behind the public image. Away from battlefields and political debates, Washington experienced the joys and disappointments of family life, developed lasting friendships, pursued personal interests, and struggled with private challenges. These aspects of his life shaped his character and influenced many of the decisions he made as a leader. One of the most important events in Washington's personal life was his marriage to Martha Dandridge Custis. The couple married on January 6, 1759, at Martha's estate in Virginia. Martha was a wealthy widow whose first husband had died several years earlier, leaving her with substantial property and 2 young children. The marriage brought happiness, companionship, and increased social standing to Washington. Together, they established a respected household at Mount Vernon, which became one of the most prominent estates in Virginia. Although George and Martha never had children together, Washington became a devoted stepfather to Martha's son, John Parke Custis, and daughter, Martha Parke Custis. He took an active interest in their education and well-being and treated them as members of his own family. Throughout his life, Washington also developed close relationships with his grandchildren and extended family members. These connections provided him with comfort and stability during periods of public responsibility and political pressure. Washington's friendships and alliances played a significant role in both his personal and professional life. He formed strong relationships with military officers, political leaders, and fellow Virginians. Men such as Alexander Hamilton, Henry Knox, and Marquis de Lafayette became trusted allies during the Revolutionary War. Washington valued loyalty, honesty, and competence, qualities he sought in those around him. Many of these friendships endured for decades and proved essential during critical moments in American history. Despite his serious public image, Washington enjoyed a variety of hobbies and interests. He was passionate about agriculture and spent considerable time managing Mount Vernon. He experimented with crop rotation, livestock breeding, and innovative farming techniques. Washington carefully recorded observations and sought ways to improve productivity on his estate. His interest in farming reflected both practical concerns and genuine enthusiasm for agricultural advancement. Horseback riding was another favorite activity. Washington was an excellent horseman and remained physically active throughout much of his life. He also enjoyed hunting, fishing, and outdoor pursuits common among Virginia gentlemen of the 18th century. These activities provided relaxation and opportunities to spend time with friends and family away from political affairs. In terms of personality, Washington was often described as disciplined, reserved, and dignified. He valued self-control and rarely displayed strong emotions in public. His calm demeanor inspired confidence among soldiers, politicians, and ordinary citizens. At the same time, friends noted that he possessed a sense of humor and could be warm and generous in private settings. Although he sometimes appeared distant to strangers, those who knew him well often admired his kindness and loyalty. Beneath his public success, Washington faced personal struggles. One of the greatest disappointments of his life was his inability to have biological children. Historians believe this deeply affected him, though he rarely discussed it openly. He also endured the deaths of family members and close friends, losses that caused significant emotional pain. The demands of leadership created additional burdens. During the Revolutionary War and his presidency, Washington carried immense responsibility for the future of the nation. He often worried about military defeats, political divisions, and threats to American independence. Private letters reveal moments of frustration, exhaustion, and concern that contrasted sharply with his confident public image. Washington's personal life demonstrates that even history's greatest leaders face ordinary human challenges. His marriage, friendships, interests, and private struggles shaped the man who guided a nation through its formative years. Behind the famous titles and achievements stood an individual who valued family, loyalty, hard work, and personal responsibility. Understanding these personal dimensions helps explain why Washington earned not only respect as a leader but also admiration as a human being. After serving 2 terms as the first President of the United States, George Washington entered the final major phase of his public life. Although he had already achieved military victory, helped establish a new government, and earned international respect, Washington remained focused on securing the long-term future of the nation he had helped create. His later career was defined by efforts to strengthen American institutions, preserve national unity, and build a legacy that would endure long after his own lifetime. These years demonstrated that his greatest concern was not personal power but the survival and success of the United States. Washington's presidency from 1789 to 1797 had already established many important precedents. During these years, he worked closely with leaders such as Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams to build the foundations of the federal government. However, by the end of his second term, Washington believed that remaining in office indefinitely would be harmful to Republican government. He understood that the nation needed to prove that leadership could change peacefully through constitutional processes. One of his most significant final achievements was his decision not to seek a third presidential term. At a time when many citizens would have gladly supported him for life, Washington voluntarily stepped aside. This decision established a powerful tradition of limited presidential service that influenced American politics for generations. By relinquishing power willingly, he reinforced the principle that public office existed to serve the nation rather than personal ambition. Before leaving office, Washington prepared what became known as his farewell address. Published in 1796, the document offered advice to future generations about preserving the republic. He warned against excessive political divisions, regional rivalries, and foreign entanglements that could threaten national stability. Although political circumstances would change over time, many Americans continued to study and debate his recommendations for decades. After retiring from the presidency in 1797, Washington returned to Mount Vernon. Yet retirement did not mean complete withdrawal from public affairs. He continued corresponding with political leaders, offering guidance when requested and monitoring developments within the nation. His opinions still carried tremendous weight because Americans viewed him as a symbol of national unity and integrity. Washington also devoted renewed attention to his estate and agricultural interests. He managed farming operations, supervised improvements, and experimented with new agricultural techniques. Throughout his life, he had believed that a strong agricultural economy was essential to the country's prosperity. Even in retirement, he remained committed to improving productivity and encouraging innovation. Despite stepping away from active politics, Washington's influence remained immense. During a period of growing tensions with France in the late 1790s, President John Adams requested his assistance in organizing military preparations. Although Washington accepted a leadership role in principle, the conflict never developed into a full-scale war requiring his active command. Nevertheless, the request demonstrated the extraordinary trust Americans continued to place in him. Another important aspect of Washington's later years involved his reflections on slavery. Although he had benefited from the institution throughout much of his life, his views evolved over time. In his final will, Washington arranged for the emancipation of the enslaved people he legally owned after Martha Washington's death. While this action did not resolve the larger national issue, it represented an important personal decision and remains a subject of historical discussion. As he grew older, Washington increasingly focused on the nation's future rather than his own achievements. He hoped that future leaders would preserve constitutional government, protect national unity, and uphold the principles established during the Revolution. His actions consistently reflected a belief that institutions were more important than individual leaders. By the end of his later career, Washington had accomplished far more than winning a war or serving as president. He had helped create traditions, establish precedents, and strengthen institutions that would shape the United States for generations. His efforts to build a lasting legacy ensured that his influence would continue long after he left public office. The nation he helped found was still young, but Washington had done everything possible to prepare it for the challenges that lay ahead. The final years of George Washington's life were marked by reflection, continued public respect, and a deep concern for the future of the United States. After decades of military service, political leadership, and national responsibility, he hoped to spend his remaining years in relative peace at Mount Vernon. Although he had stepped away from the presidency and returned to private life, Washington remained one of the most admired figures in America. Citizens viewed him not only as a former leader but as a living symbol of the nation's founding ideals. When Washington retired from the presidency in 1797, he was 65 years old. Many people expected him to enjoy a quiet retirement after years of public service. At Mount Vernon, he devoted much of his attention to managing his estate, supervising agricultural projects, and improving the productivity of his farms. He carefully monitored crops, livestock, and business operations, continuing the hands-on management style that had characterized his life for decades. Agriculture remained one of Washington's greatest interests. He experimented with new farming methods, studied advances in agricultural science, and sought ways to improve efficiency. Rather than relying entirely on tobacco cultivation, he promoted crop diversification and soil conservation. His willingness to embrace innovation reflected the practical mindset that had helped him succeed throughout his life. Even in retirement, he remained committed to learning and improvement. Although he preferred private life, Washington could never completely escape public attention. Visitors from across the United States and abroad traveled to Mount Vernon hoping to meet the famous former president. Political leaders frequently sought his advice on national matters, and newspapers continued to report on his activities. His opinions carried tremendous influence because Americans trusted his judgment and integrity. The political climate during Washington's final years was becoming increasingly divided. Disagreements between political parties intensified, and debates over the direction of the nation grew more heated. Washington watched these developments with concern. Throughout his career, he had hoped to preserve national unity and avoid excessive political conflict. Seeing growing divisions troubled him, as he feared they might weaken the young republic. Health and aging gradually presented new challenges. Although Washington had enjoyed a generally strong constitution for much of his life, advancing age brought physical limitations. Years of military campaigns, travel, and constant responsibility had taken their toll. Nevertheless, he remained active and continued managing many of his affairs personally. Friends and visitors often remarked on his disciplined habits and determination to remain productive despite his age. Washington also spent time reflecting on the extraordinary events he had witnessed and influenced. During his lifetime, he had seen 13 British colonies transform into an independent nation with a constitutional government. Few individuals in history had played such a central role in shaping the destiny of a country. While he rarely spoke boastfully about his accomplishments, he understood the importance of the institutions and traditions that had been established during his leadership. One issue that occupied his thoughts during these final years was slavery. Washington's views evolved over time, and he became increasingly uncomfortable with the institution. In preparing his will, he arranged for the emancipation of the enslaved people he legally owned following Martha Washington's death. Although this action did not resolve the broader national problem, it reflected a significant personal decision made near the end of his life. The events leading to Washington's death began in December 1799. Despite cold and wet weather, he continued inspecting his property and carrying out routine responsibilities. After spending extended periods outdoors during harsh conditions, he developed a severe throat infection. What initially appeared to be a common illness quickly worsened. Physicians were summoned to provide treatment, but medical knowledge at the time was limited. As his condition deteriorated, Washington remained calm and composed. Even during his final illness, he displayed the self-control and dignity that had characterized his entire life. Surrounded by family and trusted associates, he prepared himself for the end with remarkable courage. By late December 1799, it became clear that the nation's most respected leader was nearing the conclusion of his remarkable journey. The man who had guided America through revolution, independence, and nation-building now faced his final challenge. His death would soon bring widespread mourning and mark the end of an era in American history. On the evening of December 14, 1799, George Washington died at Mount Vernon at the age of 67. His death marked the end of a remarkable life that had helped shape the United States from a collection of British colonies into an independent nation. The news spread rapidly across the country, bringing sorrow to millions of Americans who regarded him as the father of their nation. Although Washington had spent his final years in retirement, his influence remained so great that his death was viewed not merely as the passing of a former president but as the loss of a national symbol. The circumstances leading to his death began several days earlier. On December 12, Washington spent many hours outdoors inspecting his estate despite cold temperatures, rain, and snow. Determined to continue his responsibilities, he refused to let poor weather interrupt his plans. After returning home, he developed symptoms of illness, including a sore throat and difficulty speaking. At first, the condition seemed manageable, but it quickly became more serious. By the following day, Washington's health had deteriorated significantly. He experienced severe throat swelling, fever, and increasing difficulty breathing. Family members became alarmed and summoned physicians to provide treatment. Medical practices of the 18th century differed greatly from modern medicine, and doctors often relied on methods that are now known to be ineffective or even harmful. Among the treatments used was bloodletting, a common procedure intended to restore balance within the body. Despite the efforts of several physicians, Washington's condition continued to worsen. Throughout his illness, he remained calm and composed. Witnesses reported that he displayed remarkable courage and self-control, even as breathing became increasingly difficult. He understood that recovery was unlikely and prepared himself for death with dignity. According to accounts from those present, Washington gave instructions regarding his personal affairs and expressed concern for those around him rather than focusing solely on his own suffering. Shortly before his death, Washington reportedly stated, "I die hard, but I am not afraid to go." These words reflected the courage and acceptance that had characterized his life. Surrounded by Martha Washington, family members, and trusted associates, he passed away peacefully on the evening of December 14. With his death, the United States lost its most respected and admired public figure. The reaction from contemporaries was immediate and profound. News traveled across the country through newspapers, letters, and public announcements. Americans from all walks of life expressed grief and disbelief. Many citizens had never met Washington personally, yet they felt a deep connection to him because of his leadership during the Revolution and his service as the nation's first president. Public mourning ceremonies were organized in towns and cities throughout the country. Political leaders paid tribute to Washington's achievements and character. Members of Congress honored his memory, and government officials praised his dedication to the nation. Military units held memorial events, while churches conducted special services. The collective mourning demonstrated the extraordinary respect he had earned during his lifetime. Washington's funeral took place at Mount Vernon on December 18, 1799. Family members, friends, military officers, and local residents gathered to pay their respects. Although the ceremony was relatively modest compared to the grand state funerals common in later centuries, it carried deep emotional significance. The man who had commanded armies and led a nation was laid to rest on the estate he loved. The immediate historical impact of Washington's death was enormous. Americans recognized that an era had ended. He had been a unifying figure during a period of political uncertainty and national growth. Without his presence, many wondered whether the young republic could maintain the stability and unity he had worked so hard to establish. Yet even in death, Washington continued to inspire the nation. Memorials, monuments, and public tributes soon appeared across the country. Citizens reflected on his sacrifices, leadership, and commitment to public service. The grief that followed his passing revealed how deeply he had influenced the American people. As the nation mourned, another question emerged: how would future generations remember George Washington? The answer would shape his legacy for centuries to come, ensuring that his influence extended far beyond his lifetime and into the continuing story of the United States.